Hello and welcome to Essential Microeconomics, Packs 7 to 10 with me, Mr. Davis. As you can see, we'll look at some essential microeconomics today. So again, this is in contrast to hot topics, the ones that have never turned up. These ones turn up regularly in the exams, and are ones which are some of the foundation sort of economics which you can bring into other exams. With quite a heavy emphasis on the diagrams today. There's some quick recap questions on the right hand side of each slide which you can do to sort of make your revision more active. But remember, this doesn't cover every single topic. The whole point of this is to try and give you that overview of some of the real essential microeconomics, which is often focused on the diagrams, as you're probably aware. As we've seen in previous videos, you'll see the locks in the top right hand corner. This shows you whether it is tested fairly regularly, very regularly, or virtually all the time. That triple lock there showing that it's virtually every year you're going to see a question on this topic. Okay, so we'll look at these 4 packs. Okay, so some of the fundamentals, right? So we did this at the start of year 13. These costs, and these really are fundamental because it helps you to understand building the diagram I'm going to do later in this video. So we started off back in the day looking at diminishing marginal productivity as you had more and more workers to say a fixed period of land. They're going to get better and better at some point, initially because of specialisation, but eventually their additional output's going to go down and down because there's probably less benefits from division of labour, or start to get each other's way, or you're near full capacity, and therefore the marginal product will start to fall. So the marginal product meaning what additional output does each worker gain or produce for the farm in this situation. Now the marginal cost curve will be the inverse of this. So when workers are very productive, that's great, costs are going to fall. But when productivity falls, marginal output falls, then marginal costs will rise. It's an inverse. That there is the formula for marginal cost, change in total cost of a change in quantity. In effect, that change in quantity really is the marginal product. So it's a reciprocal. So it's going to be an inverse relationship between those two. And that diminishing marginal productivity or returns affects lots of other diagrams as well. So the same sort of thing with marginal cost here. But marginal cost is the gradient of total and variable cost. So when it falls, but it's positive, then it's right. These are rising at a decreasing rate. Then diminishing marginal return sets in and it rises at an increasing rate. So it's really fundamental, that QA there, that quantity where diminishing marginal return sets in, essential. Now fixed costs will just be constant by definition. As output increases, they're going to stay the same. And that is the gap really between total cost and total variable cost. That gradient relationship between the marginal and the total is quite a key one. So gradient of the total is the marginal. Now, we just said average total fixed cost stays the same, but of course, if you divide it by an increasing quantity, the average will always fall. And then you get one of the second key relationships you have when you do these costs and revenues between the margin and the average. So marginal is what is the addition of one unit, average is just the total divided by quantity. So in a situation where the marginal cost, say producing a car, is very low compared to the average, it's going to drag that average down. But say if £2,000 to produce a car, this next one costs you £3,000, it's going to drag the average up. So you get this sort of U shape in relation to the marginal cost. So when it's below, drags it down. When it's above, it drags it up, and therefore you get this sort of U shape happening. Now, really, that's the same for average variable cost. All marginal costs are variable, and therefore it's that same relationship. One of the things you will see is that gap again relates to fixed costs. Now the average fixed costs, and that's going to get smaller. So it's going to get closer together as your output increases. So these are really technical questions. So this is like it's two locks here, like they're a little 2 marker there. That's what these things come up as really. Is explain what's a multiple choice makes, understand these relationships are happening. Most of the time, you just have to draw them and bring them into just as part of your normal diagrams. And of course, economies of scale, discount scale. This is a huge topic which you can bring into many answers you've already seen when you do market structures. Key thing is you get economies of scale here. And then You don't have to have this bit in. The reason you've got this sort of flat part of the LRAC curve is to illustrate that this is the minimum efficient scale, the first point at which you minimise average cost. So it could just be a U-shape, doesn't have to be like this. And then you've got discounted scale afterwards. So you need to have some examples of those. So like purchasing and marketing on for economies of scale, communication, coordination issues on the other side of things. But that minimum efficient scale there, that is quite important. That will influence how much economy of scales you can get in the industry, and therefore potentially influence the market structure. In terms of revenue, so for costs, they're the same really irrespective of the market structure, whereas revenue will change. So for revenue, it'll matter if you're in perfect competition or firms have got some sort of market power. So here you can see firms are price takers. So say the price was £10, then that means that there's going to be a perfectly elastic demand curve. It means the marginal revenue from the last unit, is also going to be the same as the price. And the average revenue, by definition, is the same as the price. So therefore, you're seeing a sort of horizontal demand curve, because they are. So you're going to bring that in. If you see perfect competition, that's your starting point for MR equals AR. Then the total revenue curve is going to be just rising at a constant rate. Again, that relationship between the gradient of total revenue is the marginal, so it's marginal revenue. So marginal revenue is constant, therefore the gradient is constant. So there's ways in which you can see those relationships coming in all the time that you can use to understand cost and revenues. And then slightly different for price makers. So if you're not in perfect competition, you're in moncomp or oligopoly or in monopoly itself, they can be price makers, and therefore they can choose their price somewhere along the demand curve. So if a downward sloping demand curve, a marginal revenue falls twice as fast. There's not much economics behind that. That is just a mathematical fact, but it will fall twice as fast. Make sure when you draw your monopoly diagrams, they do have that as part of it. But you can also see the relationship here between the marginal revenue and the total revenue. So when marginal revenue is positive, then TR is rising. MR is negative, then TR is falling. So MR is 0, is where's total revenue maximisation. You can also talk here about how the PD will vary across the demand curve as well. That's another way of explaining why total revenue changes, whether you're dropping your price for an elastic product or an inelastic product. And I put triple lock on this one. Mainly because, it's just, I think every single exam, some point you're going to profit maximise. So you need to know it's marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That is a key assumption in the demand and supply model. And to be fair, in market structures as well, we're going to assume as a starting point that firms will profit maximise and then maximise the difference between revenue and costs. But MR equals MC is fundamental as demand equals supply in the year 12 material. If you don't know that equilibrium, then the diagrams aren't going to work for you. I need to explain a little bit why that's the case, why it's going to reduce profit when you go beyond that, when marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue, and why you might be missing out on profit when you're below that, MR is greater than MC, how you're losing out on profit. So they could ask you that specifically as a question, but more likely they're going to get you to obviously profit maximise throughout the diagrams you're going to be drawing. And these are the sort of market structures that we've been studying. And you can sort of see that like monopoly and oligopoly are heavily tested, probably because of their real world nature. So you see them in the short answer questions and in data response. Perfect comp and moncomp, combined, every other paper you'll see one of those coming up. But that's a little bit niche, but again they got diagrams in. But as we look through the next section of this PowerPoint, you'll see how the diagrams of perfect competition are one sort, all the other ones are related to the monopoly diagram. So those are your two fundamental ones as we go through perfect competition or monopoly diagram. As I say, because monopoly is more realistic and oligopoly is more realistic, if you have a data response, monopoly diagram is the one to go for. Really, the perfect competition one is an exception when they say it's perfect competition, or it's clearly, say, some small wheat farmers or something where it's perfect competition. So you tend to go for the monopoly diagram. Having said all this, the perfect competition is one that is tested. So when you're drawing this diagram, there's lots of different versions you can do. But when you build it up, you start with show the examiner you know it's perfect competition, perfect elastic demand curve, MR, AR, DP, all those in. Here we're going to show them making a profit. So you put your profit maximize in, M equals MR, find your quantity, and everything's read off that line. So you read across, and you can show your profit A, B, C, P. You can show that diagram make a loss, as we'll see in a second. So same sort of things. Every perfect competition diagram you do, put in MRARD. Here, I'm probably hinting here a little bit, it's going to be making a loss as the average cost is quite high here. But also you see some diagrams that also include average variable cost. So we go through this a little bit. Still profit maximize. But you can see that's going to be your profit box, sorry, your loss box there. But you've also got variable cost in. So what does this mean? This means you're making a loss of CXYP. But also you're probably going to shut down eventually, but in the short run, you're going to stay in business. Why? Because you're still making a positive contribution to your fixed costs. PYZV, that box is your positive contribution. So this whole box is total fixed costs. If you went out of business immediately, you have to pay all of that back. The fact that your revenue sort of cuts into it a bit, that sort of box PYZV, actually minimises your losses. You're still making enough to cover your variable costs, and every time you cover your variable cost, you use that to pay back your fixed costs. So in this situation, you'd shut down in the long run, but stay in business in the short run. So that is a very technical diagram in some ways. That's really the limits of the hardest bit on perfect competition. They got you to explain that. But it's just trying to show you that same diagram you just apply to different situations. And in the long run, you can also show the same sort of thing. In the long run, in perfect competition, you tend to show this sort of starting point where you've got demand and supply. That's your whole industry, and that's one firm on the right. That's a great way of showing a price taker. They're taking the market price. And then what you do is you think, well, here, clearly they're going to make a loss. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen is supply is going to shift to the left, drive the price up, and therefore get to a situation where you're only making normal profits for the firm. So if you make a loss, firms exit the market, price goes up, and the opposite would be true, you made a profit. So very technical diagrams there, and not ones I'm expecting you to bring into lots of other answers, but one you need to have up your sleeve and they test you specifically on this. Now, the monopoly diagram is one where you can use it a lot. It is a very, very flexible diagram. It's your demand and supply diagram of year 13, really. So the basics is you've got AR, MR, as we said earlier. MR falling twice as fast. Profit maximise, and then make sure you go up the demand curve and across to find your price. And this very simple diagram is going to show them making a profit there. So the revenue, PAQ0 is greater than their cost, CBQ0, and therefore they make a profit PABC. And what I'm going to show here is like, okay, so that's basically what we did in the perfect condition situation a few minutes ago. Same sort of thing. All that's changed here is your AR-MR curve has changed. So it's just two sets of diagrams, but doing the same thing with it. So in the same way, if you wanted to, you put AR-MR in, and you could have, say you can still make a loss in Monopoly. So you can make a loss, and you can show exactly the same diagram, the same boxes, sort of make your loss CXYP, but make your positive contribution PYZV. So you've got these in your head. You've got to think these two sets of diagrams: the perfect competition ones and the Monopoly ones. So these two contrasting diagrams, but lots of things are very similar. You have some similarities here. Just AR-MR is differently sloped in that diagram. And then you get to the really useful ones. So the really useful ones that you can use, especially in your essays, synoptic essays, is what happens if something changes. So in this sort of example, that's just your normal profit diagram. But if variable cost changed, then you'd have a new marginal cost. And the red line shows you where you now profit maximise here. Find the price. Put your AC curve in. And then put some letters in. Now it's pretty confusing, but the fact is, you can just, all you're doing is you've got the same starting point and you put in your new curve, find your profit maximisation point, find price, find cost, find your profit box. So it's quite complicated, but it's one they do test quite a bit. You just got to request that diagram in the exam, but you want a situation where you could bring that in. In the same way, you can change demand. So here, you've got a new demand curve in, new MR curve in. Lots of lines going on. Look at the two different colours. Key thing on this diagram is find a new profit maximisation point. So MR2 is MC. Find that. Go up to your demand curve, find P2, find cost 2, and you'd see that. It's such a useful diagram. Both those two diagrams are so useful to really show off your top levels in your essays. So it's worth just hammering those diagrams and have a go at changing your costs. With your variable costs, you do fixed costs with just AC shifting, and the demand curve one here, either increasing or decreasing in demand. So hugely useful diagrams and heavily tested by the exam board. They also test quite a lot on the business objectives. So we've said profit maximisation, MC as MR, but we saw a minute ago, to want to maximise revenue, then MR equals 0. So there's your profit. If you just read off that, always read off that quantity line, find out where that is and read it all off from this. That's your profit, maximising total revenue. Or you can maximise total sales, assuming you're not making a loss. That'd be at normal profits, AC equals MR, so AC equals AR, and then you find your quantity and you make normal profits. So they test those a lot. I mean, quite a lot use of diagram to show business objectives and calculations to do with that is very common. And then price discrimination. So again, showing another application of this monopoly diagram. That's your standard profit diagram. With price discrimination, as you know, you've got to put in some curves that are very elastic, very inelastic. The key to getting this diagram right is then putting the right lines across. So what do you put across here? You put marginal cost across and average cost across. So at that point, you find your price, your lower price in your elastic market, off-peak tickets. You find that's your higher price. So for your peak tickets, and you're showing that the profit made here is less than these two purple boxes combined. So again, just more and more application. It's that same thing. So what a fundamental, essential economics is understanding that monopoly diagram. And this one, okay, slightly more complicated. What you're really saying here is you're assuming it's going to cost you the same amount for tickets in marginal and average sense, irrespective of what type of person you are. Now, in terms of monopolistic competition, you can see a situation where it's the same diagram. The only thing with monopolistic competition, this is where you have a large number of firms and a low barrier to entry, and differentiated products. So that low barrier to entry, you might draw just slightly more elastic. So that's making a profit here. So it's slightly more elastic. You could show them making a loss if you wanted to. That's fine. But I guess the difference is because it's low barriers to entry, like perfect competition, then that profit's going to go away. And you'll remember this diagram. This is where you make sure it's just tangential. You're just making normal profits there. So monopoly competition, not tested loads. So it's sort of between the two, isn't it? So it's like it's not quite perfect competition with the horizontal demand curve, but it's a bit more elastic. But it mirrors that sense of perfect competition because of low barriers to entry. Therefore, you only get normal profits in the long term. Unfortunately, it's still quite a bit of inefficiency in terms of productive output, inefficiency in monopolistic competition. But in terms of that profitability, it does mirror what happens in perfect competition. Now, oligopoly, this is tested so often. I mean, even just what is oligopoly gets tested a lot. Few firms dominate the market. High concentration. So looking over your concentration ratios, firms are independent. You've got barriers to entry, barrier to product differentiation, and you've got this sort of either competing or colluding. If you compete, it's price and non-price. If you collude, then it's going to be overt or tacit, depending whether you've got a formal agreement or not, and they joint profit maximise. So lots of different things, lots of real-world examples, your supermarkets, your high street banks, your petrol stations, all these things, lots of questions in the exam on these. And then you can use your game theory to illustrate that. So you need to be able to do game theory. It's something which, say, it comes up a lot, as in you could use it. It's not often specified for, but is in a few questions. And the key thing here is to work out your 2x2 matrix. have your two different firms, have your two different prices or strategies. It could be advertise, don't advertise, and you basically put in some profit figures for each one, starting maybe with the Nash equilibrium, then some more higher profits if you collude, and then looking at a situation if View's undercutting, they get the highest profit in the game, Cineworld the lowest, and here if Cineworld undercuts, they get the highest profit, and View gets the lowest profit in the game. And profit maximisation should be, if you add them together, should be the most for any of those boxes, joint profit maximisation. So it's a really useful thing. Again, it's something which people don't do well in the exam. If you can put it into your essays, your longer questions, it really does, if you can then explain it, go through step by step, it's a really impressive diagram to use. Monopsony is not tested as frequently as other market structures potentially, but I just put it in here to illustrate the fact you can use the diagram we looked at today in monopsony. You don't need to know the monopsony diagram, but you can think to yourself, those dairy farmers that Tesco maybe have put lower prices on could be perfect competition, or near enough, use that diagram, make you a loss. Maybe as a monopsonist, supermarkets also have monopoly power, therefore it's monopoly diagram, but reducing average cost and marginal cost. So even this topic, you can bring in those two contrasting perfect comp and monopoly diagrams into your answers. And then contestability, and this is increasingly being tested actually, still not tested a huge amount, but has in more recent years. This idea of barriers to entry and low sunk costs be very important. It's showing that even a monopoly could be efficient and might need to change the behaviour, limit their price to try and stop hit and run competition. So it basically went against this sort of idea that all those market structures we looked at on the spectrum a few slides earlier, we could work out what's going to happen in terms of their conduct and their performance and their efficiency, how they're going to behave. But actually, what Bowman argued in contestable market theory is that the barriers to entry are so key. Even if you've got one firm in the market, it's low barriers to entry, and they've got a threat of competition, they'd have to change their behaviour. Your job often is to try and work out, is the market contestable or not, looking at the barriers to entry, the sunk costs, the profitability, how much entry into the market, but also potentially they could test and never have tested how it affects you as a firm in terms of your behaviour. And then I didn't know how many locks to put on this in some ways. It is fundamental. Like, it is a lot of questions do have the word efficiency in. I don't think it's every year a question got the word efficiency in, but it is fairly commonly tested. And as a way of testing your knowledge of different market structures potentially by asking you about their efficiency. So is perfect competition relatively efficient in the long run? Is monopoly likely to be dynamically efficient? Is Apple dynamically efficient or not? If firms collude in a oligopoly, are they going to be X inefficient? So those four types are known as different ones. So as efficiency, price equals marginal cost, in the interest of consumers, maximising consumer welfare. Productive efficiency, minimising average cost. Dynamic efficiency, efficiency over time, reinvestment, potentially into R&D. X inefficiency, rising costs as a result of lack of competition in the market. So those are really fundamental. Now you've got the whole course in your head, be able to sort of think about those and apply those. And then the government intervention sort of applied to market structures. One way of looking at this is to think about them being more interventionist and market orientated. They don't say that in the specification, but there basically is two ways of doing this. You've got a dominant firm, you've got railroads that are being dominant. What can you do about that? I can cap their prices. I can put performance targets in. I can nationalise them. I can make sure they're not exploiting their workers. I can stop them merging. Like, there's lots of things you can do to control that monopoly power. Or you might think, I know what we'll do. We'll try and get the market to be more competitive. So the ones on the left are, we accept there's going to be monopoly power. How do we stop it? So the impacts of it. Whereas market oriented is, let's make the market itself more competitive and more contestable. So privatise it, point to the private sector with a profit motive, deregulate, lower barriers to entry, promote small firms to the market, competition and bidding processes to try and make sure that competition drives firms to that actual competition drives them to be more efficient. Whereas on the left, it's more things, it's acting as a surrogate for competition. It's trying to make them pretend to be efficient. Well, they are efficient. They are putting methods in to go be efficient despite the fact you are a monopoly. So those government intervention ones are quite nice. They tend to come up fairly regularly, and there's a few they haven't tested individually, as you know from the hot topics. Okay, well that is my sort of essential microeconomics, pack 7 to 10. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.